What is up, Kryptonians? Welcome to a brand new Superman and Lois Season 2, Episode 1 breakdown, recap, and review. It feels so good to say this. As you all know, I highly rate Superman and Lois. It is such a breath of fresh air coming from the CW network without kind of regurgitating all of my praise for how this show stands out in the best of ways. I've been looking forward to season 2, and with this episode, it was a solid start, and I can't wait to dive into that very ending villain tease. If you're wondering who exactly it is, we will get into some comments from the showrunner, Todd Helbing, who basically revealed who it is through talking to, I believe, Entertainment Weekly. We've got quotes to read out of who he literally confirms who it is. So, like, if you don't know about that, we will be getting to that at the end of the video, but obviously we're going to go through beat to beat of what happened in this episode, my thoughts on it, and yeah, just splurge everything out there. I'm dying to hear your thoughts about this first episode down in the comments. Even though we have an idea, well, we know who the villain is at the end of the episode, I want to know your theories as to how in this iteration they could adapt that, because Todd Helbing did definitely tease that there will be some somewhat changes, which I fully expect. With, you know, an adaptation, there's innovation. There always is. So I'm just looking forward to see how this all pans out. But go ahead, like this video if you do go on to enjoy it. I'd really appreciate that. But let's start off where this episode picked up. And that is where basically things left off at the end of last season. And because we can't forget as well how in the recap of last season, they included that part of the therapist with Lois saying that I just wonder if you needed more time to process your grief. And that is with regards to one of those powerful scenes we got last season, and where we learned that Clark and Lois had a miscarriage, which, you know, paralleled on the other Earth of John Henry Irons' Earth, that Natalie was in fact born. And obviously there's quite the spanner thrown in the works with Natalie now being here. I mean, we jump right off to that moment where I feel like, you guys know I'm a big fan of Elizabeth Tulloch's Lois Lane. The way she portrays this character, it embodies, I feel, every characteristic that she has, from the tenacity to just everything. In this moment, I just felt like even that was a great job with how she was walking away, almost in this somewhat catatonic state. She was shook. She was really shook. And I like how, despite Lois coming across almost a bit irritating in a way, I wasn't without empathy for her. I knew all of this, just like a lot of us do. We're all flawed humans at the end of the day. Sometimes we project what is causing that irritableness, and I like how they fleshed that out between Lois and Clark in this episode. She kept snapping on Jonathan, Jordan, and whatnot, and then eventually we got to that scene later on, and where she unveiled how there is a bit of a story behind it, with how she felt nothing, the guilt that came with that, the guilt that kind of is affecting her from how her mother left her. She doesn't want to be like her mum. I loved all of that getting explored in this episode. And the show naturally somewhat picks up 3 months later with a bit of a time jump. I mean, as most shows do in between seasons, and it's been like this for a while, with Lois's somewhat irritable attitude these days in the Kent family. Even the kids are picking it up. Even from the get-go, Clark is somewhat hovering around, trying to say some things to Lois, and she's like instantly kind of like, what? Like, just stop hovering around, get out of my space kind of thing. But obviously, with the context of everything, I just hope that too many people didn't get, like, pissed off with her as a whole. Because what I like with what this show does is that it does tastefully tackle real, somewhat issues. Whether that is just stuff within a family dynamic or a relationship dynamic, it does, to me at least, feel like a very realistic representation of what sometimes we are like. It's just true. Even someone as amazing as Lois Lane can be flawed, like she is in this episode, and it gets tackled in a very organic way. In between all of this, we have Jordan very excited that Sarah is coming home. He's got a bit too much cologne on. I appreciate how Clark could just smell that way before he came in the room with his super smell, I suppose. In town, in Smallville, we have Superman merch being sold. Where can I get some of that? That looked like pretty sick merch, if you ask me. But Carl is just worried about commercializing Superman and just how this place might become a bit of a tourist trap because of what happened with Morgan Edge. Obviously, everyone knows that Superman was heavily involved in Smallville, so you might have quite a bit of capitalizing on the fact that that event happened. We have Sarah come back from camp, but I kind of feel a bit sorry for Jordan in a way, because he's extremely eager, and it's kind of a little bit of that situation where you have someone who's just been really excited to see the person who went away, and the person who went away, it's not like Sarah doesn't feel anything for him, but her life somewhat took a little bit of a different direction. She had lots of other distractions, where obviously Jordan was just home in Smallville the whole time, just waiting for her to come back. When things come back, he's trying to pick up where they left off, whereas for her, it's a bit more ambiguous than that. I don't think she's really ready to dive in. And if anything, Jordan is coming on a bit strong. Again, I'm not going to lie, a very real, somewhat representation of what happens. You know, it doesn't feel like, oh, teenage drama implementation into the story. Oh, goddammit, CW, like some people like to say. Like, I'm looking at this and just saying, like, this is kind of realistic, if I'm being honest. And don't think this is the end for Sarah and Jordan with what gets explored in this episode with how she talks to her dad. And he says, you know, well, to be honest, Jordan is batting well out of his league. I mean, obviously, he's going to say that when his own daughter is involved. But he does give some half-decent advice as she recognizes, saying maybe you need to tell him that, just be honest with him. And I think, yes, that does spell like maybe things are going to be put on hold, but I do feel like this show is going to inevitably explore their relationship with Jordan maybe revealing that he is half Kryptonian. I think that's kind of a cliche, predictable thing. Again, I could be way off base with that, and maybe it's so predictable that it won't happen. I'm just struggling to believe that this will be it, and Jordan will be sad, as Jonathan was kind of offering him advice with how she said she felt ill earlier, and he's like, well, the timing of that is a bit odd. You know, I know I'm darting around the episode a bit here, but just to kind of talk about this and condense it with their plot this episode, I would love to know your thoughts on that. Do you think that Sarah really is going to take a massive step back? I think she will initially, but I feel like this could even spur Jordan on even more to kind of maybe want to trust her with a bit more. Obviously, it all remains to be seen, but it's not like, you know, Sarah's storyline is going to go a completely separate direction to that of the boys, Jonathan and Jordan. But other stuff to talk about is they teased a little bit of the Smallville Gazette this episode. Not as much as actually what I thought there would be. We can't forget how Chrissy is a series regular now, so we're going to be seeing a lot more of her, practically most, if not all, episodes of this season. And Lois, I don't think this necessarily pertains to her newfound irritableness the past few months, but with regards to the Smallville Gazette, we had heard going into the season that maybe Chrissy and Lois would somewhat be disagreeing initially before I guess they came really into their own with the Gazette, and that got shown through how Lois for the past month has been rejecting every single possible candidate for being a reporter for the Gazette before she even sometimes speaks to them. To go back to my former point, I think this is also the perfectionist in Lois. She really wants to make something out of the Gazette in town alongside Chrissy, and obviously she's an extremely reputable reporter nationwide, so like, I guess she's being very picky, but Chrissy is like, we're gonna have to compromise, on top of Clark's comments as well, with saying sometimes it's just more important to be eager than necessarily having experience. But Lois is just like, nope, but she eventually concedes and does agree with Chrissy that they will kind of have to take someone on sooner or later, rather than just kind of walking them out the door before they even have a chance. As for Jonathan, yet again, they know how to make me feel sorry for him. Are they ever going to give this guy a break? I mean, they didn't go too hard this episode, I suppose, but he's on the sub bench, and he's very frustrated when they get back to the Kent farm, because obviously he mentioned how they were doing practice for a few weeks now, and his arm is fully healed, and it's just like, why am I not ever being chosen? For a split second, thought that was meant to be a Tegan recast, but no. He mentions how he's dating Candace now, so in between a time jump of 3 months, he's met Candace, I suppose. Maybe Candace was in last season and my memory's just failing me a bit, but they're dating now, so Tegan didn't necessarily go anywhere, where I thought maybe they were going to continue down the Tegan route, but hey, it seems like Candace is a nice enough girl for him. Maybe Lois is questioning that, considering what happens a bit later. But either way, very intrigued to see where things go for Jonathan this season. You know, they could go a billion different directions for Jonathan. I think we have a bit more of an idea for Jordan, considering he is the most close character to go towards the Superboy direction for now. But Jonathan's like kind of a blank slate still. It's like we're waiting to see if he gets into any powers. If not, what direction will he go? More like the mother like son thing? Or maybe they are going to tease both ways. This is where Clark hears that the submarine is in danger. He immediately darts over there. He scans the sea. I love the cinematic kind of entrance of all of this. We saw a bit of this in the trailers, but just seeing it in full quality, I just love that we have a Superman show like this, seeing a Superman moment like this. But I knew we would be getting a bit of a whammy situation, since the trailers showed that Clark was glitching out, and there's even future scenes that we'll be getting in the future episodes, because there was that scene in the trailer where he was glitching out on the Kent farm. Clearly, something is whammying him. They even show like this little power highlight around his temple and his forehead for whatever is going on. And I really did try pausing these scenes and slow-moing them, and you really can't make it out properly what it is. You see some rubble being punched through, and maybe it is connected to the very end scene and that villain of who we will get to, starting with a D. Again, I could be wrong, and it could be something else whammying his head, because they have already revealed that there'd be kind of like a multitude of villains this season, which is something I expect with Superman and Lois anyway. You can have something for Lois and Clark, and then Lois separately, but then a Superman thing, and we've already got that with technically Anderson being the government kind of threat. There's a lot of variety here in this show, which is why I really love how they have a lot to offer without also overcrowding their own storyline. They seem to really navigate it well, albeit that still remains to be seen for this season, but I like how already there's multiple golf balls somewhat teed up in terms of interesting plot, let alone the end scene of this episode. So again, I believe for now that those obscure things that Clark is seeing, the rubble being punched through, for now, I'm just going to assume that's connected to the punches of that villainous gauntlet, if you will, at the very, very end of the episode. Again, we will talk about that. After crashing into the sea and the submarine looking like it was going to burst through the pressure, Superman does lift it up, puts it on the shore, but this then opens up new problems with Anderson. And it's just like, I just want to be like this to Anderson, screw you, man, because it's definitely an interesting storyline that we've all anticipated for this season. If you've been a bit of the fan theory crafting for season 2, you already know that most people expected some kind of military government, somewhat storyline going on this season. And after Lieutenant Anderson activated that beacon, we got exactly that. He was on the phone to one of his superiors who was saying, "I'm aware of the implications, sir. Just let me talk to him. I'm sure we'll get this whole thing straightened out." Obviously, the implications of Clark saving a Korean somewhat submarine with nukes on board and whatnot, how that could have implications. This is something that I do think is very relevant for Superman, because at the end of the day, he is something outside of any country's control. Albeit that he is more associated with America, it's always interesting to see a military perspective like this who feel like they want to wield him as their puppet, yet him always reminding them that, look, you know I'm basically an alien, even though I look like you. So technically, I'm always going to pledge my allegiance to the world, not necessarily first and foremost America. Because in this situation, I get what he was saying in terms of how he said that what he did through saving the submarine, it's not really playing well around in these parts, meaning like what people thought about what Superman just did. But I just thought, like, what, do you expect Superman to just leave these Korean people to die in this submarine? Like, what is wrong with you? You know he saves people in different countries and stuff. But the military angle does come in, and he says, you rescued a North Korean submarine, a nuclear one, and then you returned it to them. Could you have just not dropped it by American soil? So this is where the tension's going to come in. Some inflammation will come in with future events. Clearly that got shown enough in this episode, especially towards the end with Anderson's new super team, especially the audacity that he has to offer the House of L symbol on their suits. Like, as Clark said, that's not your symbol to give. They're really going to start to rub each other up the wrong way, and it almost frustrates me, but that's a good thing. Like, I'm already engaged in this storyline, and I think it's a very good one. Just to put it really candidly, because it's a real issue that if you had a Superman, even BVS somewhat explored this with Clark going to court, if you remember. Do we hold this man responsible for certain situations or whatever? How do we deal with a Superman who technically isn't regulated by anyone? And how do you even start to regulate a man like that? And that is what clearly Anderson is trying to do here. He says he wants them to be upfront with each other, like him and General Lane. He says, well, it wasn't that simple. And that's when Lieutenant Anderson says, well, that's how the upper brass see it. And Clark's just like, well, the superiors are not my concern. Anderson says, not yet. Now, with that reveal, I think it's inevitably going to get to a point, without too much theory crafting here, that his two supers from the school, if you guys remember, that Tag went to, I wonder if that means we will see Tag again. They've obviously been training them to use as specialized forces, if you will, to help save people just like Superman does, but they're obviously going to be used to take Superman down at some point, and it's going to become this kind of like, I wonder if they're going to try and spin a propaganda-esque wheel of how Superman is bad. Look what he's done. We've sent our soldiers after him because we can't control him. If we can't control Superman and he doesn't value America first, what is this going to mean? I hope things don't get that public. Maybe it will just stay as like a military discrepancy between Superman and just the government, but we're going to have to wait and see there. I would love to see your theories down in the comments as to where you think things can go here, but I think it definitely is going to exchange blows. Meanwhile, we have John Henry Irons with Natalie going to school, the same school that she used to go to in her Earth and just saying, hey, you know your name, make sure you don't do this and that. And they're playing it that she already knows all of this. What I had an issue with a little bit later is she comes out and she says Annika or whoever her old friend was just looked right through her. But beforehand, she already said, like, I know I don't know them, they're different people. But at the end of the day, I think it's still crushing to her. She knows the reality of the situation she's in, but with things that we face in real life, sometimes we know the reality of a situation, but that doesn't mean that our brains have adjusted to it. And that is a process in of itself. Whether you call that an unexpected death, it's just like, okay, I know that person's dead, but like it hasn't sunk in yet. So I'm guessing it's a similar situation here. Even though she went into school and she saw a person she cared about not even look at her properly, it's just like, well, don't you already know that? But like, it's still very hard for her to adapt to. She feels like she doesn't fit in. My only feedback, even though this is understandably they're here because of the plot of the show, you would have thought that if you're from a parallel world, you wouldn't settle down in the same city just out of how hard that will be for you to like see everything that was once on your Earth or people you cared about on your Earth not caring about you anymore. Like, it would be a lot easier to, let's say, move to a city like Central City that you never lived in before on your alternate Earth, so that way you can have an actual new start. I feel like it's so hard deliberately forcing yourself to attend the same school and see the same best friends that you had on the other. You get what I'm saying. But I understand they're here because obviously John Henry Irons and Natalie are to be in season 2. But I'm still liking where things are going, especially by the end of this episode. It's a bit of a weird situation, like kind of like, hey, you used to be with my wife on your Earth. Yet you're here now living with me on the Kent farm, and this is not my daughter, but it's Lois's, and technically your daughter through DNA. This is, just a weird situation, but also one I'm very interested to see how it unfolds, you know, as they all get to know each other a bit more. Meanwhile, though, Lois returns home and spots that Jonathan is up to a certain extracurricular activity, and let's just say that was a bit awkward. She uses the ELT to call Clark home, which I do get his point. That's not really, you know, something worthy. Like, Z comes in, like, thinking something bad could be happening. Like, for all we know, Doomsday is attacking the house there and then, if you know what I mean. No, it was to talk about that. And again, this scene shows a very flawed side of Lois projecting her frustration. I get what she was saying, but she was saying that Clark left their 15-year-old son home alone to, you know, and it's just like he left him alone because he had a submarine to go save. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not even going to take sides here because we've already somewhat been through the whole Lois thing and where it ends up anyway. She goes through a bit of introspection anyway later and it confesses to Clark, as seen in the trailers, that she's been going through something for months now and she's been blaming it all on him. So it all gets ironed out eventually, and again, it just highlights real issues that sometimes affect us and how sometimes we project it even on the people we love. As for the Cushing family, I'm still really happy they're a part of it. I know some people somewhat tune out of these scenes, but I really like Lana in this show, and Kyle and Sarah. I do feel like they are very intricately woven into the show, and don't forget that this show is still very much so a community, somewhat Smallville kind of situation amongst how many other divergent storylines they get into. And here that she's somewhat helping this mayoral campaign. We have Carl getting a little bit jealous with how they are like two peas in a pod, but as we know towards the end of the episode, that she somewhat reassures him of that, much to Sarah's disgust, because they could get a room, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I do like how, again, we can't forget that this show is also about the Smallville town. In some of those scenes, we had them expressing that they want teachers to have a pay rise and stuff. So clearly, this story with this new mayor might continue on quite a bit with, obviously, Lana's involvement, how the community are gonna, you know, there's gonna be something fishy at some point, surely, with him being elected. I'm not saying he's dodgy, but, you know, this surely isn't going to be as simple as, oh, get this guy elected. Oh, you know, improve Smallville. There's going to be a spanner thrown in the works, surely, with the Cushing storyline. I also really personally value the Lana and Clark scenes. We can't forget how they were best friends. Whether you've watched Smallville or not and saw, like, a version of Clark and Lana back in the day, like, I still really like scenes like this and how they could completely relate through the problems they were almost finishing each other's sentences over when it comes to their other halves. This is when the first sign of the certain villain at the end starts to come through, because there was a bit of a rumble of the earthquake, which gets teased. Clark then returns home to have that conversation with Lois on the balcony. But this storyline is even though she hates this feeling and wishes she could get rid of it, that there are steps being taken now. As we know, she does call up John Henry Irons asking to meet him, and they're going to explore somewhat of a relationship with Natalie. You know, it's not like she's going to pretend to be her mum, but clearly both characters are going through a struggle that has come with the catalyst that is Natalie coming from her Earth to this Earth. Not only was there a miscarriage for Lois, but it brings up some scarring memories and trauma from her mother. And then we have Natalie who's going through her own trauma of just not fitting in. You're in a parallel world where you have your best friend seeing right through you. How do I belong? And now these characters can help navigate that. And if anything, in that scene where Lois met up with John Henry Irons in the diner, and yeah, initially Natalie walked out, but they started talking, I did think maybe a part of me thought it was a bit weird at first, but then I just thought the Lois on this other Earth would probably want nothing more than another alternate Lois. She might find it weird at first, but it did occur to me that that Lois would probably want this Lois to be somewhat of a role model, and not necessarily mother, but to be there for her. I know it gets a bit complicated when you look at the intricacies of it. It's like, this is a weird situation, but I do feel like the other Lois would want this Lois to be there for her. And that's a nice thought to kind of carry through when you're watching these scenes. But I think I got a bit past myself here in how there was the earthquake immediately after that scene between Lois and Clark on the balcony, and this is where he sees the glass fracture, and he goes up, and he can see that there's some crap going down in the mine. He scans the mine, and where Lieutenant Anderson's two super soldiers, I suppose you could say, saved a worker, but that's when Superman gets whammied again, yet again, just kind of further emphasizing to me with some of the visual imagery when he's getting whammied, it just all goes back to the villain who's punching his way deep into the core of the earth. Again, very interested as to how or why he's even connected to Superman, why he has woken up now, how did he even get down that far in the first place. Without repeating myself too much from earlier, I'm super interested, especially with the line of what Clark does point out, saying, yeah, saving people from an earthquake is one thing, but they're not ready for what's out there in the world, which kind of foreshadows to me that they might be dispatched again by Lieutenant Anderson, because he's like, well, screw you, Superman, if we're not going to gel together, I'm going to get my two supers. And I think they did a pretty good job on their first inaugural mission for us, but like, yeah, I think there could be a situation where they go out there, screw it up, and Superman arrives, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe whatever their screw up is through just being new to this. Yeah, they can save an earthquake, but they might not be able to deal with, you know what I value so much about Superman? Not only is he, yes, he's overpowered, but like when he arrives to a situation, he has to very quickly figure out what's the best solution in a matter of seconds. Like, I believe the first episode of season 1, you know, when there was that nuclear meltdown, you had to just go in there and figure out exactly what to do. You have to be very thinking on your feet, and these guys probably aren't equipped for that. But I'm wondering, would the blame for whatever mess up they come up with be put on Superman? Because I remember in the trailer, they say that he's starting to become a liability. Now, that could be because he keeps getting whammied, or it could be something else. Now, other than that, I think towards the very end of the episode, we had a discussion from Clark. We have the engine rumble from outside. Natalie and John rock up. They still don't have a home, so I guess they've been living in his little mobile caravan, which is obviously teched out with all kinds of things, but now they have a place to stay on the Kent farm, so the new dynamic of the family will be changing from here on out, with Natalie being involved literally on the farm. I like this. I do like this, as I kind of teased earlier, but that's when we had a rumble again. Another rumble where Clark looks back and he kind of decides to leave it, but he's basically like, this is sus. This is so sus. Now, I would argue, I'm not gonna lie, just a little bit of criticism here. Like, Superman can hear anything in the world, so if he heard that, then he would tune into it even more and actually hear. And, like, when he tunes into it even more, it capitalizes the hearing even more. So he'd be very much so alert to what is going on, and I guess he would have flown over to it. But I know it is more of a baiting and teasing thing, and this is where we get to the villain reveal in how the camera pans way down into the earth. It keeps going layers and layers and layers and layers down to whatever is causing these earthquakes. And that, guys, is what we initially saw, the somewhat kind of techie gauntlet. Now, first thoughts is like, wait, they're not going to do Lex or anything like that, but it did remind me, if I'm being very candid here, like my first impression was like, this looks like a war machine kind of suit gauntlet thing. And it wasn't like creature-esque. That was definitely a gauntlet. Like, it was metallic. And people are already speculating, oh, is this Doomsday, or is this Mongol, or is it a war machine Lex, which doesn't really make sense because the Lex is John Cryer in the Arrowverse, even though personally I would want a recast. But no, Todd Helbing has revealed to Entertainment Weekly exactly who it is, and I am here to deliver those very lines to you. And it's kind of surprising, but maybe he just felt like, I'm just going to pull the cat out the bag. you know, maybe to not make people have certain expectations for a certain Doomsday, like the BVS one, because it seems they very much so are going to go a certain unique take that is maybe more accurate to a very classical Doomsday. But anyway, this is what Todd Helbing has to say to Entertainment Weekly, that scene was indeed setting up the arrival of Doomsday, one of Superman's deadliest and most destructive foes in the comics. That is our homage to a classic Doomsday cover, said Helbing. Then, in episode 2, you're going to see him a little bit more. In episode 3, you'll get the full reveal. So you see what I mean? It's a bit surprising with how candid he's being. It's like, well, episode 2, you can see Doomsday a bit more. In fact, what you saw at the end of episode 1 was indeed an homage to a classical Doomsday cover, and in episode 3, you're just gonna straight up see Doomsday. Okay, Todd, alright. He goes on to say there's so much lore and mythology in the Superman universe that we feel it's our obligation to tell a unique story. We take inspirations from the comics as much as possible, and then we try to twist it. We did the same thing here. So what that tells me is he's trying to tell us as an audience, we try to be as true to the comics as we can be, which is true, but just like, as I always say, these shows are adaptations, they're never copy and paste. That way, even for old fans, they will get something new out of the take. So he's basically trying to say, with Doomsday, it won't be necessarily what you expect. We're going to definitely do some homage to the old classical Doomsday, but expect some twists. Like some innovation with like, oh, it's like, oh, in this iteration, they've done this. So I'm really looking forward to that. The last thing he goes on to say about it mainly is, I think one of the things that we all really dig about the comic book world, but particularly with the villains, is finding ways to use assumptions about a character and then flipping that, and finding ways to explain things that haven't been explained in the comics, like the use of something, or why a character does a certain thing. It will all be revealed in episode 3, but there are a couple of little things that we're doing that I can't explain too much because I'll give it away. But you'll see how we're influenced by certain pieces and why we use it to create work that is hopefully a cool reveal. So again, just kind of reiterating what I just said there, and I have a lot of faith because they knocked it out of the park in season 1, and I'm always down to see a new innovation of a character, whether that's Doomsday or whatever else he's got cooking next. I find it funny, he says, but you know, I can't really explain too much with this other thing, so I'll give it away. He kind of gave away this Doomsday thing, but I guess he wanted to be a bit more upfront about that. But he's also teasing us that there's something even cool, maybe cooler in the background cooking. But that is the information I'll leave you guys with, and ultimately my conclusion is that it was a solid premiere, and I'm just looking forward to see this episode series unfold as the episodes unfold. If you're brand new here, do consider subscribing for more in-depth breakdowns like this on Superman and Lois every single week. Give this video a like, especially if you got this far. I'm dying to read your thoughts and theories down in the comments. I'll be looking on my phone tonight, so yeah, I expect to see them. Other than that, guys, links as always are in the top pinned comment. Check out some of my other videos which, you know, are on my channel, and thank you just so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. I'll see you fellow Kryptonians in the next video. Goodbye.